Welcome back to my YouTube channel. They didn't even try to hide what they were doing. Every table was dressed in roses and laughter except the one shoved near the exit, my table. One chair, one place card with my name, just in case I forgot where I belonged, out of the way and out of the picture. I smoothed my dress, pretending the isolation didn't burn. My sister had made it clear months ago that I was lucky to even be invited. My mother's silence confirmed it. And now here I was, placed not with cousins or friends, but beside the emergency exit like I was a fire hazard, not family. I kept my chin high. If they expected me to cry or leave, they picked the wrong woman. Halfway through the reception, while everyone toasted love and legacy, I scrolled through my phone to look busy. That's when a chair scraped beside me. I looked up, startled. A man I'd never seen before leaned in slightly and said quietly, "Act like you're with me." I blinked. "What?" He gave a small, easy smile. "You look like you could use an ally. I'm at table 3 with the groom's college friends, but I'd rather be here." People were staring. The same relatives who didn't save me a seat suddenly looked confused. Even my mother's fork paused midair. He extended his hand across the table. "I'm Daniel." I shook it, unsure whether to laugh or tear up. No one had stood beside me in years. Not like that. Then came the bouquet toss. My sister, glowing with champagne and control, tossed the flowers high over her shoulder. I wasn't even standing with the other women. Why would I? But fate, or maybe pettiness, had a wicked sense of humor. The bouquet arced straight toward me. Except it wasn't floating romantically. It was barreling for my face like it was launched from a cannon. Before I could react, a hand shot out. Thwack! He caught it inches from my nose. Gasps rippled across the room. My sister whipped around. The look on her face? Like watching a chandelier shatter in slow motion. Daniel stood, still holding the bouquet. "Sorry," he said calmly. Would have smacked her right in the face. The silence that followed tasted like victory. For the first time all night, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. He didn't grandstand or play hero. He just sat back down like catching airborne roses to save a stranger's dignity was an ordinary thing to do. And maybe that was the moment I understood. Sometimes we don't need someone to rescue us, just someone who refuses to let the world pretend we don't matter. By the end of the night, I walked out with my head high, bouquet in one hand and a new kind of fire in my chest. Not because a man showed up, but because his quiet reminder cracked something open. You belong where you decide to stand. And if someone tries to push you out of the frame, step back in, whether alone or with unexpected company, because the world doesn't get to seat you in the corner of your own story. They didn't just sit me alone, they made a show of it. Every table glittered with polished cutlery and curated smiles, seats packed with relatives, bridesmaids, and friends of friends I hadn't seen in a decade. Yet there I was, at a table shoved so close to the exit that every server passing by grazed the back of my chair. No centerpiece. No extra chair. No attempt at subtlety. It was their way of saying, "You're here," but only because we couldn't justify leaving you off the guest list. I could hear my aunt's voice from earlier that day, whispering to another relative as I walked by, well, she always was the odd one out. They didn't lower their tone. They never do when they want you to hear it. My mother pretended not to notice the comment, and my sister, today's blushing bride, barely spared me a glance when I arrived. She was too busy taking pictures with her bridesmaids, women she once told me were more loyal than family. I sat down carefully, smoothing my dress, pretending the isolation didn't sting. I kept my expression neutral, the kind you wear when you've practiced not reacting. I'd grown used to being the afterthought, the sister who didn't fit their mold. I wasn't the golden child, not the one who followed the script. Marry well, stay agreeable, and never embarrass the family. They said I was too blunt, too independent, too different. So today's seating plan wasn't an accident. It was a message wrapped in lace and venue lighting. Laughter rose from the nearest table where cousins clinked their champagne glasses, retelling childhood stories I was conveniently edited out of. My name floated through the air like a rumor, never in my direction. It was the kind of exclusion that didn't require words. They wanted me to feel it. And I did, but I refused to let them see it. I straightened my back, crossed my legs, and lifted my glass of water like it was champagne. If they were waiting for me to crumble or excuse myself quietly, they were going to be disappointed. I might have been seated alone, but I decided right then I wouldn't sit in shame. I focused on the condensation sliding down my water glass, anything to ground myself in the moment and not in the sting of being so publicly sidelined. The room glowed with warm lights and curated joy, but the laughter felt like it bounced off invisible walls around me. I wasn't part of the celebration, I was decoration. And not the kind anyone bothered polishing. A few guests glanced my way, not out of concern, but with the smug satisfaction of spectators at a show they thought they understood. I recognized the look. People who already picked a side before they heard a story. One of my cousins whispered something to her husband, both of them looking at me before turning back to their plates. Another relative pretended not to see me at all, even though we locked eyes for a half-second before she deliberately shifted her face toward the dance floor. The weight of the past pressed in, moments when I'd tried to speak up and was told to stop being dramatic. Times I skipped family dinners to protect my peace, only to be labeled ungrateful and distant. I remembered birthdays where my presence was optional, holidays where my chair was always the extra one added last. Today just happened to come with expensive linen and a photographer. But humiliation wasn't unfamiliar. It was just dressed better this time. I straightened my shoulders and let the silence around me work in my favor. If they expected me to shrink, they'd forgotten who they raised. I had built a life outside of their approval, outside of rooms where I was tolerated but never embraced. Yes, the pain was still there, sharp in the chest, but so was the resolve. Leaving would have given them the satisfaction. Reacting would have fed their narrative. So I stayed still, poised, unbothered on the surface, even as a part of me felt 12 years old again, standing at the edge of the family photo waiting for someone to wave me in. The speeches began, and every toast was a reminder of the story they liked to tell about themselves. Perfect family, perfect day, perfect bride. I sat alone but not broken, breathing through the familiar ache of being present and invisible at the same time. I was mid-scroll on my phone, pretending to be deeply invested in absolutely nothing, when a shadow crossed the table. A chair scraped the floor beside me, a sound so out of place in my corner of isolation that I looked up on instinct. A man I didn't recognize sat down like he had every right to be there, calm and unbothered by the stares he was already attracting. Before I could ask who he was or why he'd chosen the one-person exile table, he leaned slightly toward me and said in a low, steady voice, "Act like you're with me." For a second, I thought I misheard him. My eyebrows lifted on reflex. What? He didn't flinch? You shouldn't be sitting here alone. It wasn't pity in his tone. It was something closer to annoyance at the situation, like he was correcting a mistake someone else made. His eyes flicked briefly toward the main tables, then back to me. There was no smirk, no performance, just quiet intention. I searched his face, trying to place him. He didn't belong to my side of the family. I knew that for sure. He wasn't one of the familiar onlookers who thrived on secondhand drama. His suit fit well, not flashy but confident, and his demeanor suggested he wasn't here to ask permission for anything. Why? I finally asked, more out of habit than curiosity. I'd learned to question anyone who pretended to choose me. He gave the smallest shrug. Because they're wrong for leaving you here. The words weren't loud, but they hit something in my chest I didn't realize was bracing for impact. My pulse quickened, not from romance or surprise, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of someone noticing without demanding an explanation. I glanced around. Heads were already turning, conversations quieting just enough to let their curiosity breathe. The shift in attention was subtle but instant. The girl who was safely ignored a minute ago suddenly had company, and not the pitiful, mismatched kind my relatives would laugh about later. He offered his hand across the table like we were sealing a casual introduction instead of rewriting an entire social script. "I'm Daniel," he said. I took his hand, steadying myself against the countless eyes pretending not to see. My voice came out softer than I intended. I know, he said gently, not with presumption but with clarity, like he'd taken the time to observe before approaching. He released my hand and sat back like he'd just taken the most natural seat in the room. I couldn't decide if I felt rescued, exposed, or seen. Maybe it was all three, and for the first time that night I wasn't just part of the background. The music shifted to that familiar upbeat track they always use for bouquet tosses, half tradition, half spectacle. Bridesmaids and single guests hurried to the center like it was an Olympic event, all giggles and anticipation. I stayed seated. No one expected me to stand, and I wasn't about to give them the show they wanted. The unwanted sister scrambling for symbolic leftovers. My table, our table, now that Daniel had claimed a seat there, sat a short distance from the action. I watched my sister take center stage with theatrical delight, bouquet held high. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the crowd with the kind of satisfaction that comes from believing every eye is on you for the right reasons. I almost looked away, but then her gaze flickered past the crowd and landed on me. Just for a split second, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, spite, amusement, maybe both. As she turned forward again, she tossed the bouquet high into the air with a force that was a little too intentional. The arc of it wasn't random. It shot over the women gathered and flew farther back, hurtling toward the one place no one was standing. Me. To everyone else, it probably looked like poor aim. To me, it looked like a message wrapped in stems and ribbon. I didn't even move at first. I just watched it sail toward my face in slow motion. The gasp from someone nearby barely registered before a blur of movement cut across my vision. A hand shot up beside me, steady, quick, unhesitating. Thud. The bouquet landed cleanly in Daniel's palm, inches from my cheek. The sound of the catch was louder than it should have been, sharp enough to snap the room's attention toward us. He stood smoothly, bouquet in hand, like he had planned to intercept it all along. The room fell quiet in ripples. My sister froze halfway through turning around, expecting giggles and applause from the front, but instead met a silence thick with confusion. Daniel didn't grandstand or toy with the moment. He simply looked at the flowers, then at me, and said clearly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "That almost hit her in the face." His tone wasn't dramatic. It was factual, almost casual, but it rang through the quiet like a challenge no one had prepared for. The bridesmaid stopped mid-laugh. My mother stared like her fork had turned into a knife. Even the DJ hesitated over the next track. The bouquet wasn't a cute token anymore, it was evidence. And he was holding it like proof of something they could no longer pretend not to see. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. In that moment, with every eye flicking between us, I felt something shift, not just in the room, but inside me. For once, I wasn't the easy target or the silent punchline. Someone had stepped into the line of fire and caught it before it hit me. The air in the room didn't just still, it recalibrated. Conversations that once ignored me now hovered around our table like moths to a flame they didn't understand. People weren't sure whether to look directly at us or pretend nothing had happened, but their curiosity betrayed them. Every sideways glance confirmed it. The script had been interrupted. Daniel didn't sit down right away. He held the bouquet loosely at his side, not triumphant, not embarrassed, just steady. It wasn't the flowers that made people stare. It was the quiet certainty with which he'd claimed the moment. My sister finally blinked herself back into motion, turning fully to face the crowd, then us. The expression she wore wasn't the polished smile she'd practiced in every mirror leading up to this day. It was the face of someone who'd lost control of the narrative. From where I sat, I could see her swallow hard. Her fingers twitched around the fabric of her dress. She'd expected me to look ridiculous, maybe even scramble, but instead someone intercepted the humiliation before it landed. And worse, he didn't look like a random sympathizer. He looked like he belonged with me. Daniel eventually eased back into his chair, as though nothing about the evening had changed, even though everything had. He laid the bouquet on the table between us with effortless finality, as if placing a marker down. This is where the line shifts. A cousin who hadn't acknowledged me in years suddenly appeared interested in small talk with someone nearby, all while stealing glances in our direction. An uncle nudged his wife, whispering with the subtlety of a foghorn. Even the bridesmaids, my sister's carefully curated inner circle, were thrown off balance, their laughter coming out thinner now, glancing back more often than posing for photos. I felt eyes on me that had never seen me before, at least not like this. Not with someone choosing to sit beside me without apology. Not with someone catching what was meant to bruise. The strange part wasn't the external shift, it was the internal one. I wasn't performing composure anymore. I simply owned it. The humiliation that had hovered around me all evening loosened its grip, replaced by a low, steady warmth in my chest. It wasn't gratitude alone, it was recognition. Not of him, but of myself, reflected through the one act no one expected, someone treating me like I deserved to be there. Daniel leaned back in his chair, not smug, not seeking credit, just present. He didn't check for reactions or wait for approval. He didn't need to, and maybe that was what rattled them most. They spent years shaping a version of me that looked smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. In one silent choice, he'd disrupted their favorite story. I didn't thank him out loud. I didn't need to. The moment wasn't about owing him anything. It was about finally seeing what it looked like when someone refused to play along with my erasure. And though no one said it, and no one would dare acknowledge it, a truth had settled into the room like dust on crystal. I was no longer the easiest person to ignore. The rest of the evening didn't unfold the way my family planned. They didn't suddenly become kind or apologetic. People like that rarely transform in a night. But they did something I'd never seen before. They hesitated. Before speaking to me. Before looking past me. Before pretending I wasn't there. My mother kept glancing over like she was trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know existed. My sister avoided my eyes entirely, her practiced smile failing at the edges. She tossed that bouquet with the confidence of someone sure they'd already written the final scene, only to realize someone else had picked up the pen. Daniel didn't cling to me or hover. He just sat there, grounded and unbothered, making it unmistakably clear that my solitude was no longer entertainment. At one point, he leaned slightly in my direction, not performative, not possessive, just present. It was enough. When the night wound down and guests filtered out in sequined clusters and slurred congratulations, I stood up on my own. Not to leave in defeat, but to walk out with my head level and my shoulders uncurled. I didn't wait for approval or acknowledgement, didn't search their faces for softness that was never coming. I didn't need it. As I reached the exit, Bouquet still resting on the table behind us like a surrendered weapon, Daniel fell into step beside me, not leading. Not following, just aligned, at the door. I paused and looked back, not at them, but at the space I occupied. The same table they used to make a point had done something else entirely. It marked the end of me shrinking myself to make them comfortable. They hadn't given me a place. I'd taken one, and that's the part they'll remember long after the photos fade and the flowers die. Not the dress I wore. Not the seat they assigned me, but the moment someone caught what was meant to hurt me. And I refused from that second on to sit where I was put.